Good morning. I learned something really interesting. By the way, I've uploaded... Yeah? Alles good?
Yeah.
So, I've uploaded the links. I put it on our WhatsApp group, and also it's now in the YouTube, the links to the bundle of pretty much all of the documents that are related to what we are discussing. I learned something interesting, that when you put in the title of a YouTube video the word controversy, in this Alma de Shikra, that the views go up exponentially. I didn't do it in order to, as clickbait, as I think they call it today, but that's the way it is. Anyway, so let's move on. We are... We are making our way through this masterclass. I know I use that word with the reference to the Ramban's letter, but really Rav Lopiansky's article here also strikes it is a masterclass. It's written incredibly well. Not only the elegance and the clarity of the prose, which I appreciate as somebody who appreciates English, but he combines a number of different disciplines almost. On the one hand, like I said, he's a classic. He's a Gadol B'Torah, very big Talmud Chacham, and one of the foremost mechanchim of young men, certainly. And he has a lot to teach. I have some of his Sforim at home. I would recommend, by the way, he has a book in English, and I think they brought it in Hebrew as well, called Ben Torah for Life. Really worth reading. Really worth reading. I am a chassid of his Torah, I must say. And there's a website also, and you can get some of his. Anyway, the point is, but what he's done. One of the things he's done here, which I like, is he has used, instead of. Let me step back. Let me give an introduction. Something that I think I've said before, but I want to say it again. There are three ways to respond to a perceived challenge to an idea. And people generally tend to fall into one of the two camps because they are easier. One is polemic, right? Which is I imagine that in German it would be polemic or something. Yes? Am I right? Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I don't know why, I just had this sense. Because it's a word that is so nuanced that it doesn't really lend itself necessarily to the German descriptive way of...
Greek word.
It's probably, yes, almost certainly. Yeah, I don't know its provenance. Anyway, so usually what, in English also we can say tub thumping. Fire, hell and brimstone, fire and brimstone, where you respond by banging your fist on the table and saying anybody who says this is an apikoros and kach kiblu me rabbi seinu and da, and it's this view cannot be countenanced and blah blah blah. Which sometimes, by the way, kanos has its place, depending on time and place and person and context, etc., etc. But that's polemics, and therefore you're not engaging. You're not engaging with the person or with his idea at all. And sometimes maybe it's right not to engage, possibly. The other way is what apologetics, which would be, I'll give you an example. Somebody attacks Torah on the basis of saying the Torah isn't progressive. It doesn't champion the rights and the cause of women. So then the approach which one sometimes hears from in some quarters in the left, which makes me uneasy, is apologetics. Is to say, you think you're progressive? I'll show you how progressive the Torah is. The Torah gave financial security to women in the form of a ksuba thousands of years before Rape within marriage became illegal in most Western countries in the 1980s. Go check it. We've had it. We've respected women. You think you're progressive, you're liberal. I'll show you how progressive and liberal the Torah is. And whether the points of substance are true or not, it is the utterly and incorrect approach. Why? Because what you're saying effectively is the touchstone, the bar is set by modern Western liberal values. And now I'm going to show you how I can shoehorn Torah into those values. But what reigns supreme is the modern values of personal autonomy, blah, blah, blah. And I'll show you how the Torah can shoehorn. And that is also dishonest, because it is doing a disservice. Not only is it doing a disservice to the Torah came before the so-called, ironically named Enlightenment. And it stands, and the real answer is, so it's not polemics, it's not apologetics, it is context. Have the courage, and we've mentioned this before, the courage, the humility to step over the threshold into Hashem's world. Torah is his world.
What do you do?
So you do it within its own context. It has its own discipline, its own parameters. That's a Masorah. To understand it and to learn it carefully, critically, but carefully within its own. And this really highlights what we've seen in the last couple of days when people don't do it that way. And they approach it as if you would approach a critique of John Stuart Mill or Bentham or whoever it is, and just attack it because your view is as valid as anybody else's, and your interpretation of core texts is there's no sense of context or Masorah at all.
In the example you just cited with feminism, you could cite this exact answers that you gave, provided that you give a nuanced preface, so to say, where you put things into context and say that Torah's speaking about something else.
You're right.
However, if you want, then I could bring those examples also to show you that.
Correct. But one would need to do it, again, you're absolutely right, it's very nuanced. It would depend very much on the approach and the context and the tone. If a person is saying explicitly or implicitly that really my supreme and overarching set of values are those of liberal Western secular democracy, and I need somehow to show how the Torah fits into that, then you have a problem, because that is a dishonest approach intellectually. And it's very like, you know what, when I talk about this to secular students or people who had very little or no exposure to Torah at all, and you have to be very careful and sensitive, because you're not going to overturn their vegan, eco-warrior, social justice warrior world, and nor should you attempt to, because there's not going to be any communication, any dialogue. But if I may suggest to you a Moshe, an analogy which I use, which is effective if it's done right, is that of social anthropology. So, for example, if you are going to spend 2 years deep in the Amazon jungle studying the ethnology and the social structures and the world of a particular tribe that has had very little or no exposure to the modern world, what's the first thing you need to do? First thing you need to do is you need to inoculate yourself to make sure that you don't bring diseases to them for which their immune system is not prepared, that you don't kill them off with your kindness. That's the first thing you need to do, right? You go and get all your various inoculations so that your immune system, so you don't give anything off to them. But also, equally, you need to inoculate yourself so that you don't catch dysentery and smallpox and tsetse or whatever it is that they have. That's the first thing. So you need to create a certain amount, make sure that you don't do any harm to them, you're not imposing anything on them, and they don't, that's physically. Then the next thing you have to do is go native. You have to go native. What?
Before already, yeah.
Yes,
Anyway,
but you go without preconceived notions. And you go and you sit with them and you dress, eat, drink, laugh, cry, engage in their rituals, and get an insight into their world without projecting any of your Western secular liberal traditions. Because if the point is to understand them, not to judge them, but the point is to understand them, the only way you can do that and get a true picture is by removing, as much as is possible for any human being, to remove your confirmation bias, your cognitive dissonance, or any of the other psychological things that color your perception, and try and see it from within its own reality. And that takes time, it takes humility. They may be doing things to women or with women or children or food or animals and things which are deeply offensive to you. But if you want to understand, that's the only way to do it. And it's the same thing with Torah.
Actually, Rav Hirsch makes this point in his 18 letters.
Yes, I think, yes, yeah. But I use this as a moshel, and it's one which people, I think, understand. And it's usually, if it's done well and done carefully, it is quite effective. And that is the best way. I can't do better than that. It's like Torah is experiential. Learning in a yeshiva, for example, as being part of that Masorah, it's not just, by no means just about the data. That's why one needs a Rebbe, really. It needs, Torah is v'shinantam levanecha, really parents were the bearers of the tradition, or a Rebbe, because it's, what Chaim Soloveitchik calls the mimetic tradition, or the Masorah. It's more than just the data, because data, anybody today can be a Google adder. Yeah, it's no big deal. But the context and the values and the frame of reference and the approach is equally important. And that, I think, so this was all become a very long introduction to why I value and why we're studying this particular article that he's written, because he's actually combined, he's coming from the world of Torah very much so, but he's also combined it with academic integrity, the research, the proper research he's done, for example, into the provenance of this document. You can see he's written to, he wrote to the National Library of France about how it came to their position, via which cardinal, and so it's not just a Talmud Chacham, though he is, sitting in his ivory tower and pronouncing and banging the table and saying Moshe Taku could never have said this. First of all, who is he? He's given us a good broad view of who he is, where he's quoted, who he's quoted by, the potential problems with the authenticity of the document, and now we're going to delve into the meat of the matter, which is the misunderstanding of the manuscript himself, because he is, first and foremost, a Talmud Chacham, right? So we're up to here, it's on page 53, misunderstandings of the manuscript. There are two factors, I believe, can mislead the reader of the manuscript. Number one, the manuscript is an attack on Reb Sadia Gaon et al. An attack on another's position does not usually lend itself to proper explanation of one's own position, because the focus and the thrust is the negation of the other viewpoint. A lawyer attempts in every way to find holes in his opponent's position, but does not reveal his own position until the last moment. Good classic courtroom strategy, right? So too, a polemic usually suffers from an excess of description of the antagonist's weaknesses without clearly stating the polemicist's own position. That's point number one, why he believes that it has led to misunderstanding. Number two, there is a short preface to this work by Kirchheim. Many people have probably read the preface, but then only skimmed through the work itself, because it's not an easy read. Even if they bothered to actually read the work itself, they were surely heavily biased by the preface. Kirchheim was a formerly Orthodox Jew, a sheikhet who had turned Reform. Like all apostates, he needed to shore up his conversion by attacking his previously held convictions. Thus, he presents the following argument in his preface, paraphrased. Here is the work of a great halachist and Talmudist who had the most benighted views about God, i.e. that he has a body, etc. This only shows you that without the blessed study of secular philosophy, one can end up with the crudest of beliefs. Maimonides, blessed by being an intellectual too, had the best of both worlds. So this is if you're going to read this document, your view is going to be coloured to some extent by this preface. Okay, fine, be that as it may. Kirchheim's evaluation of Ksav Tomim has been eagerly seized upon by many people whose attitudes resonate with Kirchheim's message or who simply enjoy its contrariness. To his credit, Professor Dan is not happy with Kirchheim's analysis and offers a different explanation described later, which, while it contains a grain of truth, is, as presented, rather lame. And he's going to go through this. Let's go through this now. Re-evaluating Rav Moshe Taku's position. I will try to present, says Rav Lopiansky, what I feel are the main points of Rav Moshe Taku's thesis. First, I will offer a preface which will explain why corporeality is an untenable position. Then I will offer Rav Moshe Taku's 5 points of contention with Reb Sadia Gaon et al. They are, number one, the limits of reason in theological inquiry. To what extent can I use logic when I'm talking about theological inquiry? Number two, the appropriate explanation of anthropomorphisms. How do I accurately describe anthropomorphisms? 3, the untenability of interpreting Shechina as a kavod nivra, a created essence. These remember, are the 5 points through which Rav Moshe Taku attacks Reb Sadia Gaon. The third point is the untenability. That means you cannot interpret Shechina as a Kovod Nivra, a created essence. And fourthly, Reb Sadi Gaon's acceptance of allegory as an accepted approach to interpretation of the Torah. Reb Moshe Taku was not happy with using allegory. And fifth, the concept of God's immanence, which we will get to, if you don't know yet what it is. Immanence versus transcendence is one of the big issues in philosophy and the interface between philosophy and Kabbalah generally, which still goes on via the school of Ishbitz and Reb Tzadok and others, possibly to some extent the Gra versus the Tanya, whatever. I mean, it's a big topic, but not for now.
Yeah.
So let's see.
Ishbitz a radical immanence?
Yes, sort of. Yes.
Tzadok is also more on that.
Who?
Side of Tzadok.
Reb Tzadok is probably the foremost. We'll come to it. Is probably the foremost proponent of immanence in a certain in terms of hashgacha. And let's not be drawn into that. It's I know you. I also enjoy this very much, but one has to be careful with this as well, that it shouldn't be misunderstood. Yes, well, it came down via his Rebbe, the Ishbitzer, Meir Shilayach, and down into the Kisvei Reb Tzadok are suffused with this notion, most notably with regard to Teshuvah and Hashgacha, etc., etc. Anyway, let's go back. Let's go back. Right, page 55 now. The understanding that God has a sort of body puts him, chas v'shalom, in the same category as an idol. This is Rav Lopiansky. He is now going to explain I think one can say at a rational, at a logical level, how the very concept of corporeality is incompatible with Torah. How so? Why so? Because if you understand that God has a body of any sort of body, even if it's in the ethereal, fire, whatever, even if it's not a physical body, of course, nobody would suggest that, but it's made of much a finer material of some sort, right? That chas v'shalom puts Hashem in the same category as an idol. The Torah's most central message, repeated endlessly in both the Torah and Nevi'im, is its vehement and total negation of idols, which are defined as physical beings held to be divine. If God has a body of some sort, then belief in God is, as opposed to belief in idols, become a question of which body is the true God. God is no longer an absolute category, but a relative valuation. You hear that? Simple logic. No one reading the Torah can honestly conclude that such a belief is possible. And this is really very similar to what I told you in the name of Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, that it is equally blasphemous to suggest that Hashem is spiritual. It's just an extension of that, because spiritual then is also a category. Logically, it's not 100% the same, but the concept is the same. Secondly, the Torah itself, speaking in a clear a language as possible, warns the Jewish people, after the events of Sinai, that you shall be extremely careful not to make images, as you have seen no image whatsoever at Sinai. This is as clear and as unequivocal a statement as possible that God has no image, despite Shapiro's attempts to say that you just didn't see an image, that's why you can't make an image, but he actually has an image, which is bizarre. Anyway, but the most powerful reason why the notion of corporeality, so he's made 2 points so far. Number one, because there is then substantively no difference between the representation of divinity in the form of an idol or the representation of God in a physical form. It's similar. And number two, that was number one. Number two, the Torah itself expressly prohibits it. Number three, he says, which he says is the most powerful reason why the notion of corporeality is an untenable position, is that it leads to logical absurdities. A primitive idol worshipper's beliefs may be ridiculed, but he can at least state them in a meaningful statement. In epistemology or in logic, you can state the rock has extraordinary powers. The Baal Oved Avodah Zarah will say the rock or the sun or this image, whatever it is, it has extraordinary powers. That is the contention, right? That is the claim of an Oved Avodah Zarah. We may show that this is not so, but at least his statement is a linguistically meaningful statement. It's not gibberish. It's not nonsense. He hasn't said 2 and 2 is 5. The fellow has made a statement which may or may not be a true statement, but it makes sense. The statement as a statement of ideas from a logical perspective makes sense. Of course, No one would consider Reb Moshe Taku to be a crass idolater, but at most, rather only a sophisticated corporealist. It is usually taken to mean that Hashem is some sort of body, a very refined, fire-like material that resembles the human body. Okay? But why would a being living in the heavens above have a human-like body which is designed to live on earth? Why would there be feet rather than wings? Where do we see feet? Tachas raglov, Mari livna sasapir, right? Why a nose when he obviously does not need oxygen? How can a specific entity, refined as it may be in different places simultaneously? At least the idolater does not attribute infinite powers to a finite being. This is simply the very tip of the iceberg in reducing the concept of a corporeal God to meaningless gibberish. If we are not willing to impose any boundaries to the entity that we are describing, then we have simply not described anything. Again, get that in your head. If we are not willing to impose any boundaries to the entity that we're describing, so on the one hand, this is God who is boundless. If there are no boundaries at all, then we have not described anything. To define comes from the word fin, which means to set a limit. When I define something, I give it its boundaries that set it apart from any other entity. To say that something is physical, but not to allow it any physical properties and limitations, is to play a meaningless word game. If, because of the above reasons, non-idolatrous corporeality is meaningless, then what is Reb Moshe Taku's position? So he's pointing out that logically we need to find something which makes sense. It may be wrong, but it has to make sense. And if we are to take it at its simplest form, in other words, what he's saying, he's actually doing something very fascinating from a pure logical perspective. He is giving a lot of credit to Reb Moshe Taku by saying, he certainly was not a crass idolater. He was quoted, he was quoted and viewed as one of the Rishonim. So, and at the same time, therefore, he would not have said something that is, clearly not in line with basic psukim, and two, he would not have said something which is gibberish. So then we have to make sense of what was he trying to say. We may not agree with it, we're not going to, but it has to make sense, so we need to explore that. So that's the first thing. So you see what he's done? So he's basically given three reasons to show that there's no way to interpret Reb Moshe Taku as perhaps some would have us believe. So now let's see what his position is. Of the over 50 available pages of the Ksav Tovim manuscript, the majority consist of quotes from Reb Sadia or citations from Chazal and Midrashim supporting Reb Moshe Taku's position. However, we can identify approximately 50 passages that give us a sense of his own position on these matters. Number one, the limits of rational exploration. Now here we get, this is a side topic which I actually had not, I had something on the original set of sources from Reb Sadia Gon, which I then took away because I didn't want to go there, but he's taking us back now in this direction, like, can Hashem square a circle? Can Hashem make 2 and 2 to be 5? And various other logical absurdities. Yeah? Well, let's see where he goes with this. The limits of rational exploration. Reb Moshe Taku posits that the Mishnah in Chagiga, who says whoever investigates what is above and what is underneath should never have come into this world, the Mishnah places limitations on rational inquiry into any aspect of divine existence. Any question and subsequent answer, no matter how religiously motivated, are wrong and get us nowhere. Just as a fork cannot be used to eat soup, so too is the human mind unable to deal with the divine. Thus writes Reb Moshe, we have a couple of quotes. Page 59. There are those who are wise in their own eyes who invent ideas which they project as Ma'aseh Bereishis. Each one invents different ideas, and it would have been best had they all kept silent. Another quote, our rabbis taught us not to expound on the matter of God's name, even though one intends this for his honor and glory. Another quote, since God is totally hidden and appears only to angels in a manner in which they perceive, and so to his prophets, how does a human being indulge in contemplating about God's essence? Furthermore, it is nonsense to contemplate the issue of God contracting his self, Tzimtzum, or to contemplate that idea. Another quote, the rabbis taught us to contemplate his great and wondrous creations called Ma'aseh Bereishis and Ma'aseh Merkava, but who can possibly enter the Eish Oicheles, the fire that consumes fire, and survive? Furthermore, we cannot contemplate that the Creator was before creation, for the essence of God is not known to anyone, not even to the angels. How much blasphemy they have spouted. They thought that they would understand the essence of God with their simple and limited mind and imagine that they would thereby reach a bond with the divine. These are quotes from Reb Moshe. Number 2, in many places he emphasizes the infinity of the divine. Thus, he says the following, and there's a selection of quotes, we'll just go through some of them. And that which has been written, he rides on a cherub and appears on the wings of wind. Really? Does he need to ride on cherubs and winds? Hasn't he created them? What does he need them for? Rather, it is a way for him to demonstrate his glory to the angels and to the Jewish people. The images are a way of recognizing an aspect of God's power and luminescence that is in reality infinite. God's essence and greatness cannot be evaluated and nothing can be compared to him. Okay, I think that's enough as a...
Doesn't sound very corporeal.
Exactly. So here, Rabbi Lopiansky has cited a number of sources to show where Rabbi Moshe Taku very clearly accepts the infinity of the divine. Let's move on. Considering all these citations, which show clearly that Rabbi Moshe Taku does not believe in God's corporeality, so what does he believe? What is his approach to God's essence? It appears that he believes that the Torah and Chazal define for us the attributes of God in terms incomprehensible to us. And despite their being inherently incomprehensible, these terms reveal many truths as long as we understand them appropriately. Now, this sounds a bit contradictory, and he's going to explain. Again. So he's done two things. Let's understand this clearly. On the one hand, he has definitely spoken about the limits of rational exploration. He's spoken about Hashem's being utterly infinite. So then, what does he mean? So Reb Lopiansky is now, he will evidence base it, we'll see. He is suggesting that the Torah and Chazal define Hashem in terms that are indeed incomprehensible to us. Now, what would be the value of that? And what's the point of it, and what do we get out of it? He says that even though these terms are inherently incomprehensible, but they reveal truths as long as we understand them appropriately. Let's take a few examples from the worlds of mathematics to illustrate this. Number 1. Simple arithmetic deals with concrete objects that can be defined. Thus, 2 apples and 2 apples will equal 4 apples. Algebra is a refined process, where we know only certain aspects about a number x, such as, for example, that a certain number x, when squared and divided by another unknown number y, will yield the result z. I admittedly know nothing about the numbers x, y, and z, but as long as I apply the given knowns about these entities and I follow the rules of algebra, the extrapolated statements will be true. So far, so good? Okay, number 2. Let's go to a more complex variety of numbers, namely negative numbers. We cannot easily define negative numbers since there are no negative numbers in nature, and they certainly do not define any objects. Yet, when we follow the rules governing operations of negative numbers, we will come up with applicable truths. Thus, if I take out 10 loans of 100K each, I will owe $1 million. So you're able to take a concept, negative numbers, which has no counterpart or no definition in the known physical world, and if I operate those laws correctly, they will yield a mathematical truth without knowing anything, without it having that counterpart. That's statement number 2. Statement number 3. Perhaps the most difficult of numbers to define is I, the square root of -1. There is no number in our universe that multiplied by itself will yield -1. Yet it fits perfectly in equations and helps us ascertain truths in many areas. It works. Similarly, the concept of instantaneous speed in calculus is essentially meaningless but yields eminently tangible truths, and here I must admit I do not know what instantaneous speed is, and I didn't take the time to find out. I mean, we could use the world of science, which I know a little bit more about. Sorry? And no idea. Well, let's see where he's going to go with it. I think we should... No, but his first example is Eli.
Instantaneous speed? I don't know.
Instantaneous speed. I don't know what instantaneous speed is.
But what is the word?
Instantaneous means miyadi. Miyadi.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Without acceleration.
I don't know what that means in maths.
לא, זה כמו אולי מהקוונטיק פיזיקס, שפתאום חלקיק יכול להופיע פה,
לא,
הוא מופיע פה.
רגע, I know about entanglement. It's an entanglement. And which is, yeah, but he's talking about maths. I don't think he's talking about the polarity of subatomic particles, and that when you change the flavor of one, that the other one beyond the speed of light changes immediately, and they are the so-called entanglement. I don't think he's really dealing with that, but that doesn't matter. Let's go on. In the same manner, Rav Moshe Taku is telling us that we need to take the words which the Torah give us and apply them within their appropriate parameters. Thus, if it says God's eyes are upon it, we must apply the concept of divine eyes within the appropriate parameters and conclude that we are constantly being observed. We do not and cannot ask questions or contemplate what those eyes are. We have no tools for that contemplation, and it's like contemplating the value of eye. So he is walking a middle path, which is fascinating. Let me share with you something I heard from my father, Shlita, which he heard, if I'm not mistaken, he heard from Rabbi Miller Zechon Livracha, from Reb Dessler, that's how. It's in Yiddish, I'll say it in Yiddish. Wir kriechen nicht in den Himmelen zu verstehen, was tut sich im Himmel. Wir kriechen in den Himmel zu verstehen, was tut sich da unten. Germany, it made sense? Kind of. Yeah?
To understand what is...
When we engage in deeper aspects of Torah, call it Kabbalah, whatever, deeper aspects of Torah, the point of this inquiry is not to understand what is actually happening there. It is all to give us an understanding of Hashem as he relates to us and what he wants from us. Asagvehu ki yodashmi. The Shari'or in his Akdama explains. We say by the way, we say in Birchas HaTorah, v'yoydei so lishma. We should be kulanu yoydei shmecha. We should all be yoydei shmecha. Shame, it's this week's parasha. Va'ira la'avos, b'shmi Hashem le'nedati lehem, kel shakai. Shmi, shame, is the mode within which Hashem operates to us at a particular point in time and wishes to be perceived as such. Din, Rachamim, etc. The 10 spheros are not names. Each of these 10 spheros, that's the whole Sefer Shari'ora, is miyusad to explain which of the 10 names of Hashem correspond to the 10 spheros, which are midos, which are both from the word number and sapphire, and limit, sapar. Yeah? So it's a gvul. It's concrete, it's discrete, it's defined. Chesed is not gevura. It's also a number. The world of mathematics is another one. How the language of Hashem, with which Hashem constructed the world, being mathematics, 0 and 1, etc. And that's another. But it's also sapphire. Kalivnas has sapphire. The word sphere also, the Rishonim say, come from sapphire. It's something that through which you can perceive and get an understanding. Hashem's essence is not something that is known, as we've stressed. We've seen so many times in this series of shiurim, again and again and again and again. We can't say anything about it at all. We can't even say negative things about it. Nothing. When it comes to attributes of Hashem, according to the Rambam, via negativa, you can say negative things. That's all you can say. But that's all we ever deal with. And what he's explaining here is that Rav Moshe Taku is saying that the Torah spoke to us. Hashem speaks to us in terms where we know they are utterly incomprehensible. We know that Einei Hashem does not mean Hashem has eyes. Or rather, again, Rabbi Miller used to say, as Chon Baruch used to say over, this is not Rabbi Victor Miller, it's Rabbi Mordechai Miller from Gateshead, one of the 3 primary Talmidim of Reb Dessler. And he would say, just to give you a different way of looking at it, he would say, when we're talking about anthropomorphism, so we say, Yemincha, Hashem's right hand, and we say, Hashem doesn't, he doesn't have a right hand, it's so that we should understand. That's arrogance in the extreme. Hashem has, whatever it means, which we cannot know what it means, it's incomprehensible, he has the right hand. In order that we should have some very pale tiny little way of relating to it in some way. He gave us this. But he's got the real hand. Instead, we have the arrogance from our materialist perspective of saying, we have the hand. He doesn't really have a hand, but yeah, whatever, because it's the other way around. He's got the real hand. Whatever that means, we cannot know what that means. But he therefore gave us something so that we would have a way of, that's the Torah class from the other. You flip it on its head, as you always do with Torah. And this is what, this is the beginning of the thesis, the way Lopiansky is understanding Moshe Taku, that the Torah speaks to us using terms that, admittedly, we cannot know anything about, and yet we can relate to them. By the way, you mentioned science. I'll very quickly mention it because it's a pet topic. We know that there are absolute, utter contradictions in science. Real not paradoxes. They are real contradictions. The above an atom and below an atom. The maths tell us that they cannot both be true. Einstein's general theory of relativity and quantum physics cannot both be true. Mathematically, they cannot both be true, and yet they are. And yet they are. There's nothing wrong with the laws of maths.
At the same time, they can be true?
They can. I don't want to be drawn too much into it. Again, I'm not a mathematician at all, but I've read enough books to know that this is absolutely so. And it's not just that how do we know they're so, because on the basis of real world experience, GPS, machines that only work because general theory of relativity is true, and things that only work if quantum theory is correct. And yet they're both absolutely true. And the truth is, this is just the physical manifestation of the immanence versus transcendence paradox. Bechira and Yediyah, it's all the same thing. It's all the same sugya. But that's maybe I'm getting a bit carried away. But the point is, this is something, and here's the main point, and this is what is relevant. The main point is, like in maths, we can have ideas, negative numbers, which don't exist. It's a difference. It's only a marshal. And yet, we need them, and they work, and they reveal truths. I don't know what X is, I don't know what Y is, but if I know that there is a relationship between an X and a Y and a Z, and I apply using calculus, I can arrive at things which are absolutely true, despite knowing nothing. I can work with it. So he's using that as a marshal to say, and he's going to give more mashalim. So I say, Einei Hashem. Tomid, Hashem's eyes are constantly on Eretz Yisrael. Meireshis Hashana d'Achris Hashana. What are Einei Hashem? No clue. Can't be physical. No clue what it means. But it gives me a message. Without diluting, there is something called Einei Hashem, which I can know nothing about. And the Torah telling me that Einei Hashem is on this, it means he is looking after it. We are being observed. We do not and we cannot ask, what does that mean? What is the nature of that contemplation? It's unknowable, but it's still useful and relevant. And this is where he's going. Let's go further. What is the point of possessing information which is unfathomable? To gain a sense of the utility of such knowledge, imagine the following. A group of very bright people who were unfortunately born blind attend a school designed to help them prepare for life. They have been taught to dress themselves immaculately. They have no conception of colour, but each of the garments is labelled for colour with small braille characters. The problem now arises of how to teach them to coordinate the various colours of their clothing. Two teachers approach the problem in different ways. The first is philosophically oriented. He describes the colours by analogy. The red is described to the students as the beating of a drum or the taste of hot pepper, while blue is described as a waltz, or the feel of smooth cream. The idea behind this method is that translating the sensation of colour into terms of hearing or taste, which by the way can happen, synesthesia, it's a real thing, but anyway, the idea behind it is so translating the sensation of colour into terms of hearing or taste will enable the blind students to draw their own analogies, so that red will be used to express excitement and blue to express calmness. So they will be able to dress and colour code in a way that will suit what they're feeling, etc. The second teacher is much more practical and goal-oriented. He simply drills into the students a list of which colours matches under which circumstances. If his list is exhaustive, so the second one doesn't approach this philosophically, he approaches it very practically and tells them that this which is labelled blue goes with white, but blue never goes with, I don't know. I'm struggling here, I'm a man. Come on.
Green.
Blue never goes with brown. It's also not true. whatever. I don't know, doesn't matter. Let's say black, let's say blue and black. So he'll teach them that you never put blue with black. Blue potentially could go with this, it could go with that, could go with that. So at the end of the day, the students from who have the second teacher will look okay, and the ones from the first teacher presumably will also look okay. Let's have a look. So the second teacher is more practical and goal-oriented. He simply drills into the students a list of which colour matches which, under which circumstances. If his list is exhaustive, and the rules are carefully followed, they will always be perfectly dressed, despite their lacking the slightest idea regarding the nature of colours in general. 33. Professor Dan states that while Reb Moshe did not believe in corporeality per se, he endured it as Yisurim Shel Ahava of the divine texts. It sounds as if he's saying that Reb Moshe accepted the text warts and all. This explanation is not very convincing or comforting, and even its meaning is not all that clear. Okay, don't know. Right. The second approach describes the approach used by Reb Moshe Taku. We use the terms describing God, applying them within the confines allowed, and we arrive at correct answers without having the ability to probe the essence of the terms. See addendum below. And maybe this is something that we should see at this stage. And then come back, although we're out of time for today. So we'll have to be continued in Mitzvah Hashem next week.